So I've been asked a few times now to make a so-called Warframe checkpoint video, which basically outlines various objectives that you need to achieve in the game in order to progress. This is something I've been putting off for a while because not only does Warframe get updated on a semi-regular basis, meaning the approach to the game changes, but also it is largely based on RNG as to how quickly and in what way you progress. Not only that, but my suggested route through Warframe will differ from most players, as I'm an avid Eidolon hunter, so my goals in the game, particularly kind of around the mid-section, will tend to revolve around builds that are good for Eidolon hunting, which is not everyone's cup of tea. All that being said, I have now finished, so to speak, 3 Warframe playthroughs, and I'm a good ways through my 4th, and whilst the game has changed an enormous amount in the time it's taken me to do that, I have found that many of the steps I take, particularly to begin with, have not changed all that much. So, somewhat reluctantly, I have decided to make this video which outlines my, and this is just that, my own strategy for progressing through Warframe, as it currently stands. This will undoubtedly become outdated in the near future, but anyways, let's get on with it. As a new player in Warframe, the sheer mass of content can be quite overwhelming, and as such I always suggest that players look to the long-term goals before thinking short-term. What is it that you actually want to achieve? Well, for me, in all of my playthroughs, it has been to obtain every weapon, Warframe, companion, and so on in the game, max them out, and subsequently get to the highest mastery rank possible, which obviously changes every time new content is introduced. Now, there are a lot of Warframes, weapons, companions, and so on in Warframe. Some are very easy to obtain, and some are an absolute nightmare. The key to being able to get everything is to first give yourself a good foundation to work with, and by that I mean a small set of frames and weapons that you can use as a base to essentially access all the content the game has to offer. Now, there will be a few stepping stones in order to get to this point, but once you're there you will find that playing the game becomes much more relaxing and faster, as you will know exactly what frame and weapon to use in every situation you encounter. So, let's get on with it. So some things I want to state from the outset. Anytime you have the option to increase your mastery rank, do it. I also want to suggest Vault as your starting frame if you are feeling particularly speedy, as well as Scanner as your melee weapon. The other weapons are your choice, I don't really care, whatever you fancy. And also, if Nightwave is active when you start, any extra time that you may have should prioritize completing the Nightwave missions, holding on to the Nightwave credits until you need to spend them. I will inevitably skip over large parts of this game as I want to keep this video a reasonable length. If I included everything I do in my playthroughs, this video would be at least several hours long. If I have missed something important, which I inevitably will, please leave a comment with what it was for others to benefit from. I will again reiterate, this is my suggested and preferred route through Warframe. It is not to be taken as a "this is how to play the game" or "you're doing it wrong" kind of video. It is purely to outline how I have done it over the past 12 years. So without further ado, let's get into it. Warframe's items, mods, syndicates, etc. all require credits, Warframe's main currency. Getting a frame that can reliably farm credits quickly and efficiently should be your first priority, as it will allow you to begin ranking up your mods and hence access higher level content. Fortunately, Warframe drops a perfect credit farming frame right at our feet in just the second planet we visit, and that frame is Rhino. Rhino can be attained from the Fossa node on Venus. Once you have finished the intro missions and tutorial, your first objective should be getting to Mercury and getting Rhino. At this point in the game, the enemies are so weak that you should not require any additional weaponry or modding to farm this frame. Simply go node by node over to the Venus junction. You can usually complete the junction at this point simply using your starting frame's first ability, and then from there, again, go node by node over to Fossa. Depending on your RNG, you can farm Rhino pretty quickly, and once you have all his parts from the Jackal, you can purchase his main blueprint from the market and set to work getting the materials to build him. Getting the materials to build Rhino is actually a good way to guide your next actions. You'll immediately notice that you need resources that aren't available on the 2 planets you have access to. Namely, you'll need plastids, gallium, and morphics. Of those 3, plastids will be your biggest headache. The earliest planet you can get plastids from is Phobos, and even on Phobos, plastids are somewhat overshadowed by rubido. That being said, you can find plastid deposits lying around which you can break for a decent amount, rather than trying to get them from enemies. Since you pick up a Thief's Whip from the Phobos junction, this should be equipped to your frame straight away to help you farm. Anyway, once again, the enemy level at this point is so low that you should be able to work your way over to Phobos with very little trouble. Firstly, you'll need to complete the Mercury junction, the requirements for which you can see by simply hovering over the junction. Then as soon as you've done that, you should complete the Once Awake quest, following which you need to double back to Earth and complete the Mars junction. Side note at this point, you will have bumped into both the Ostron at Cetus and Vox Solaris at Fortuna, both of which have their own standing and rewards. If you have a lot of time in the day, you can start at this point to earn standing with them by doing bounties. However, if like me you have to prioritise your playtime, I would suggest ignoring them for now. Once you're at Mars, you will then need to work your way over to the Phobos junction, the requirements for which are fairly straightforward. You will need to speak to Maru at this point as well, so whilst you're there, be sure to complete the weekly Iatan treasure hunt. Not only do Iatan treasures trade in for Endo, but also if you happen to get a mission for Maru in an Orokin Derelict tile set, you will also inadvertently gain access to Deimos without progressing through from Mars. Once you've opened your 3 relics, which if you are struggling to obtain, farm Spear on Mars for some liths, get to work farming your plastids for Rhino. Chances are you will have collected the rest of the resources required at this point, however, if not, you should have access to the planets that have them. Once you have all the parts for Rhino crafting, you have 3 days and 12 hours, assuming you start crafting Rhino as soon as his parts finish crafting, to work your way around to Neptune, where the index is located. Along the way you will pick up a number of mods just through normal gameplay, however there are some that you will want to make sure you have when you get there. These are going to be fairly crucial to ensure you gain enough damage on the next weapon you are going to be crafting, which is the Vectis. You can get the Vectis blueprint from the marketplace once you are MR2, which, realistically, you probably should be at this point. You'll notice that it requires Orokin cells and nanospores, which can both be attained from Deimos, which, if you got lucky in Maru's weekly mission, you should have access to. If not, make your way there through Mars. Once you've begun crafting the Vectis, you can now go from Phobos through to the Void. In this branch of the Void, you want to get over to Hepit, which is a capture mission. In Hepit, you can begin to farm the Orokin puzzle rooms for the mods we spoke of a moment ago. Puzzle rooms appear at least once in each mission. You just gotta look for them. The mods that you want to get out of this are as follows, and bear in mind some of these you may already have. Serration, Point Strike, Vital Sense, Hellfire, Stormbringer, and Split Chamber. Although that last one has a very low chance of dropping from Orokin puzzle rooms, and you may have to get it elsewhere, possibly through trading, as it is very cheap. Speaking of trading, it is worth either joining a clan, or if you want to start your own clan, you can do this now. I am not, however, going to dive into solo clan management in this video, so we'll presume you've joined a clan. I'll make another video at some point about solo clans. So let's say now you have the Vectis and you've collected the above mods. I would recommend using 20 platinum at this point to put an Orokin catalyst onto your Vectis, unless you're able to obtain a catalyst elsewhere, either as an alert reward or from Nightwave. Pump as many resources as you can into the mods to put as much damage on your Vectis as possible. Do not spend Forma at this point. Focus maxing Vital Sense, Point Strike and Split Chamber first, and then spread evenly between the other mods until the capacity on the Vectis is full. You can do all of this as you make your way over to Neptune. This should be able to basically carry you through the Origin system without problems. Anyway, to Neptune. You need to get through Ceres, Jupiter, Europa, Saturn and Uranus. Use the junction objectives to guide all your steps to get there. Whilst doing this, I would also recommend starting to get some standing with the Untrati family on Deimos, which you should have access to, as you will have needed to complete their quest in order to get to Ceres. I would suggest only trying to get to rank 3 with them at this stage. So quite a bit later, you will arrive at Neptune, and perhaps at this point, you will have access to Rhino. Equip Rhino and your Vectis, and work your way around to the Index. You will at this point have a very low level Rhino, so I would suggest continuing on for now, unless of course you got Rhino earlier, until it's maybe MR20 or higher, rank 20 or higher. At this point, you want to equip your Rhino with health, armor and strength mods, whatever you have to hand really. You should then be able to solo one round of the high tier index. If you're unsure how to do this, I have a credit farming guide on my channel, which you can look at, and I will leave a link in the description down below. Now that we have access to a source of credits, stage 1 is complete. This stage is all about getting a build that can help complete missions quickly and efficiently. First of all, our speed frame. Players get very hung up on increasing their damage output, but in actual fact, a lot of the mission types in Warframe don't actually require you to deal damage. For example, rescue, sabotage, spy, and even survival if you're only planning on completing the mission. Assassination and capture missions can to some degree also be lumped into this category, as you are only looking at dealing damage to a single target. For all of this, we are going to aim to get our first prime frame, which is going to be Titania. Titania can complete the above missions incredibly quickly, and later on we can utilise the Helminth to allow her to clear missions which do require enemy interaction. Hence I suggested you start getting standing with the Entrati family earlier in order to get the Helminth segment. You might be wondering why Titania Prime and not normal Titania, and the reason behind that is that even if Titania is vaulted, i.e. her relics are not accessible at the time you're playing, it is faster to farm the platinum needed to buy her parts than it is to complete the Silver Grove quest. You'll also get a load of other prime parts you might need along the way. So to farm platinum at this stage you have two options, and to be honest I would suggest mixing them up. Firstly, opening relics. You should have a small supply of relics at this point which you can open. Always do this on public as you have access to 4 different parts at the end of your mission. At this stage, and regardless of what drops, always choose the most valuable parts. If you are unsure on the value of parts, then I would recommend getting a Warframe market account, as this will give you some idea of what to choose. As a general rule of thumb, however, gold trumps silver and silver trumps bronze. Whilst opening relics, you will also be gathering up void traces. You can use void traces to upgrade your relics, so they are more likely to drop rare parts, or you can use them to craft corrupt keys, the blueprints for which can be bought from the Orokin lab in the Clan Dojo. You are going to need to use these to farm up corrupt mods from the Orokin vaults on Deimos at some point anyway, so I would suggest doing this during your relic opening spree, and any duplicate mods that you collect you can sell for platinum. Now a Titania set is worth around 70 platinum at the current time, or 60 if you want to buy the parts individually, but this will obviously use up your trade limit, so perhaps don't do that. Once you've made enough platinum from selling relics and corrupt mods, buy the Titania set and get to work gathering the resources for building her and get her crafted. With Titania built, you are now basically in a position to complete the star chart. Build her for health, strength, duration, and try and keep efficiency at a decent level if you can. Also, throw Razorwing Blitz on there for an insane amount of speed. At this point, you want to continue to get through the remaining planets, again using the objectives on the junctions to guide your way. An optional stage at this point is to get Gauze. Gauze's main blueprint can be purchased from the market, with the remaining components obtainable from Kappa on Sedna, each one dropping on Rotation C. If you're MR8, you will at this point, assuming you've got to rank 3 with the Entrati on Deimos, be able to get the Helminth segment for your ship. If you're not MR8, then pick up some more weapons and sentinels to rank up. Sentinel blueprints can be bought for credits from the shop and give the same amount of MR as Warframe, so are a great way to get some early game mastery points. Having got Gauze and the Helminth segment, be sure to get Gauze to rank 30 and then subsume Gauze to gain his Thermal Sunder ability for use on other frames. You may need to feed your Helminth a bit before it's high enough rank to do this. You can then put Thermal Sunder onto your Titania for an excellent solution to most other mission types in the earlier game, including Exterminate, Defense, Interception, and Mobile Defense. If you also want to, you can at this stage trade for Archon Vitality, which will nearly double the damage output of Thermal Sunder. PS, don't forget to invert Gauze's ability in the settings menu, otherwise when you tap you will deal cold damage and not heat. Be sure to invest a bit as well into Titania's Dex Pixia, as then you will never need to leave Razorwing when doing boss fights, etc. Also, if you're doing sortie missions that have a shotgun requirement, for example, you can simply throw on a cheap shotgun to Titania and then just use Dex Pixia in the mission instead. So now we've got our Titania, we can conclude stage 2. With this frame, we should be able to essentially complete the entire star chart and all the story missions without a problem. I say all the story missions, I should add at this point that you will need to get a Necromech from Deimos and a Railjack. If you're struggling with this, use the platinum farming method we discussed earlier and gather the Necromech parts that way. It might save you a bit of a headache. Also, definitely get Void Rig first. As for the Railjack, just complete the Railjack quest and go no further into improving it at this point. You do not need a good Railjack for the new war quest. As you go about clearing the origin system in normal mode, completing every node, you want to start to think about focusing more on other factions in the game. We're going to leave Deimos alone for the time being, as we should already be at rank 3 with the Entrati, which is enough for now. We are instead going to focus specifically on 4 factions: the Ostron, the Quills, Solaris United, and Vox Solaris. If you have time, you can also rank up Zariman standing, but it isn't immediately needed. At this point in the game, you should have access to Nama bounties on both Fortuna and Cetus. Use the Nama bounties on Earth to farm standing with the Ostron, and Nama bounties on Fortuna to farm standing with Solaris United. Whilst doing these bounties, you will then gain Nama Isoplasts, which can be used to rank up both Vox Solaris and the Quills. Each time you need to rank up, focus on getting the items required and rank up as soon as possible, so you can make the most out of your daily limits. It's worth noting at this point that you will want an Arcwing launcher, which can be purchased from your clan's Tenno lab. Using Volt, which you may have started with, will also speed up bounty mission times considerably, as he can move around the map extremely fast and speed up drones with his second ability. Nova is also a good frame for completing bounties. Remember, every time you need more credits, take Rhino back to the index farm. Now let's assume you've cleared the star chart and are still in the process of ranking up your factions. We want to focus on the next tools to acquire to make our lives easier. For me, there are 3 things we want. Let's think about frames first. At this point, I tend to look at what parts I have lying around for prime frames that might prove useful moving forward. Crucially, we are going to need a farming frame. Your options are either Cora, Necros, Atlas, or Hydroid, although the last 2 here I consider to be slightly inferior for farming. Cora is usually my go-to, so let's stick with her. Similarly to how we farm Titania Prime, we will open relics for parts and trade with Platinum when necessary to gain the remaining parts. Once built, trade for pilfering Strangledome and also accumulating Whipclaw. There are plenty of comprehensive videos on farming with Cora out there, so I'm not going to go into detail with it here. To accompany our Cora, we want to get hold of a stat stick. In my experience at this stage in the game, I always go for a weapon that I know I'm going to be able to use elsewhere in the game and not just as a stat stick. This, for me, is where Exodia Contagion comes into play. For those of you who do not know what this is, see my recent video. To make our stat stick, we are going to create a Zor. Hopefully at this point you will have enough standing with the Ostron to get the parts you need. Currently I am running a Rab V Strike with Stung Grip and Vargeet 2 Ruhang for maximum critical chance and damage. The Rab V has a fairly good Riven disposition as well, and so makes a nice stat stick. Assuming there isn't a Knights of Neighbourus event or Plague Star event active at the moment, you will have to trade for Exodia Contagion, which is usually in the region of 100 platinum. Also, on your Cora you will need mods like Blood Rush and Weeping Wounds. You can either trade for these if you're bored or farm them up in-game. You can use the Warframe wiki to find all the locations for these mods, so again, I'm not going to go into it here. Now, assuming you have access to Steel Path, considering you should have completed all the normal star chart nodes by now, you want to take a look at the daily Steel Path incursions. Completing these will allow you to branch out from whatever node it was on, giving you access to other planets without having to work your way over to them. This way you can gain access to some nice farming spots. Farming on Steel Path is always better as the drop rates are much higher and you can farm on solo whilst having the enemy spawn rates of a full squad. And you get Steel Essence, which is just quite useful. Okay, so farming frame gained and we're working on accessing Steel Path nodes for farming. In the meantime, we need to get access to a frame that can pack a punch and also survive the increased damage of Steel Path enemies. Usually I would recommend Mesa at this juncture, but recently I've been enjoying Chroma. Although he doesn't have the same level of map destruction as Mesa, when combined with Exodia Contagion he can easily wipe out Steel Path enemies. So for me at this point, I'm getting Chroma Prime and I'm going to do it exactly the same way as the previous Prime frames I've got. Once your Chroma is crafted and fleshed out a bit with some strength and sustain mods, you should be able to use him, in conjunction with your Contagion, to basically wipe out anything whilst remaining near invincible. It is at this point I would recommend really starting to think about Zariman standing, as we are going to want to gain access to the Latum. Once you have the Latum, be sure to max out the Incarnon stats, which, by the way, will require you to get 2 other Incarnon weapons, one primary and one melee, so take your pick. I would generally go for the negative crit chance and then the 50% chance to hit 2000% damage on the final upgrade. Put as much damage into it as you can, along with fire rate, as we will use this with our Chroma in order to do the weekly Archon fights, which will be our first source of Archon shards. When we get our Archon shards, I will use any Amber shards to improve the parkour speed of my Chroma, any Crimson shards to improve the strength of my Volt, yeah, remember him, or Volt Prime if you happened upon some of his parts earlier on, and any Azure shards on my Titania to improve Energy Max. This is just initially, and by no means for the long run. So to conclude this stage, we've now got our Farming Frame, our Exodia Contagion Zor and Stat Stick, our Tank and Damage Frame, and our Pew Pew secondary weapon. If you've managed to get to this point, congratulations, you are nearly at the point in which you can begin hoarding all of the gear that Warframe has to offer. There's just a few more things we're going to need. It's at this point that my gameplay direction will differ from others, as I tend to start farming up my Eidolon builds at this point. If you have no interest in Eidolon hunting, then you can still complete the first part of this stage, as you will probably need to / want to anyway in order to gain focus. We're going to start by revisiting our Railjack. First things first, we're going to join a random squad in Vale Proxima and keep doing that until we've gathered up enough tier 3 parts to make a good Railjack. You can see my Railjack guide video to get an idea of this. Once your Railjack is up to scratch, there are 2 things we want to focus on. The first is getting all Railjack intrinsics to rank 8, except for Command, which we want to get to rank 9 to gain access to on-call crewmates. At the same time, we will use our Railjack to farm both Sevagoth and Oberon. Sevagoth from Voidstorms and Oberon from points of interest on Earth and Saturn. You can see the wiki for the exact details. Once we have gained Sevagoth and Oberon, we will max both out and then feed them to the Helminth. Following that, we can farm up Banshee Prime. We can then use Sevagoth's Gloom from the Helminth on Banshee and farm up Focus using this in conjunction with Banshee's Silence and its associated augment mod Savage Silence, and our Exodia Contagion. If you don't plan on doing Eidolon hunts, I would suggest farming up 2 lure lenses of each focus group, starting with Nariman. If you plan on doing Eidolons, then start with Madurai. You do not need lure lenses if you are planning on Eidolon hunting, but perhaps greater lenses. Put 1 lens on your Banshee and 1 on your Exodia Contagion Zor. With Nariman, you can gain an additional 45% affinity with your melee weapon, and so gain focus much faster. Again, I have a video on farming focus with Banshee, so please look at that for more info. It's worth noting that you will need 10 brilliant Eidolon shards to unbind waybound nodes in all the trees, so at some point you will need to capture at least 10 Terrorists anyway. Farming Eidolons will allow you to trade in Eidolon shards for focus, allowing you to break the daily focus limit and max out your focus scores faster. Okay, so we've got Banshee and we're able to start seriously farming focus. Now we want some good amps. If you've been farming your Quills and Vox Solara standing correctly, you should be moving up the ranks to the point where you can build a decent amp. If you are still in the lower ranks, I would suggest building a 1-2-3 amp consisting of Replac Prism, Shraxon Scaffold and Lauren Brace. If you are higher ranked, then go for a 1-7-7 amp consisting of Replac Prism, Proper Scaffold and Certus Brace. For me, this is usually the time I get my hands on Volt Prime. I would probably get him sooner if I didn't start with Volt in the early game, but in this instance I did. If you want to see my Volt build for Eidolon hunting, or at least what you should aim for, see my most recent post-Eclipse hunting video. The Eidolon Guide 2024 will be coming out soon if you want to stick around for a more in-depth look at Eidolon hunting. So at this point, if, like me, you like Eidolon hunting, we'll be doing that for a while and honing our build to suit our needs. If not, then our next endeavour is to start racking up standing with the Cavia in Sanctum Anatomica and also improve our credit income. It's not strictly speaking necessary if you are happy sticking with Index, but I much prefer Profit Taker with Chroma over running Index. If you want to see my Chroma build for Profit Taker farming, I'll leave a link in the description below, but suffice to say, that is why we farmed Oberon earlier, so we can use Smite on Chroma to gain radiation damage. Alright, I think we're there now. To clarify, in stage 4 we got our focus farming frame, began our Eidolon hunting journey, and began work on farming Profit Taker. Just an FYI, this is by far the longest stage and is often where players hit the so-called wall. This is essentially where I'm up to with my current playthrough. We have our foundation in place and we can begin working our way up the ranks. The first thing we need to do is ensure we have enough slots for all the frames, weapons, pets, etc. that we're going to need. This is going to take a lot of platinum, unless of course you're happy just selling stuff and reusing slots, in which case this will go much faster. If you do want to get enough slots for one of each weapon variant in the game, and by that I mean one variant of each weapon, so if there was a prime variant of a weapon, I would sell the non-prime weapon for its slot, then I would suggest farming around 3,000 platinum at this point. Depending on how dedicated you are, this could take weeks, or even months. However, in the process of doing this, you can get your hands on a ton of other prime parts which you'll need eventually. Once you've got your platinum for your slots, it's time to start ranking up. We'll focus first of all on non-prime Warframes and Sentinels, as for any Warframes that have a prime counterpart, we can feed them straight to the Helminth once they are maxed out and thus open a new slot. Warframes and Sentinels also contribute 6,000 MR each, as opposed to weapons which only give 3,000. Then we'll move on to non-prime weapons, and again, any with a prime counterpart we can get rid of as soon as they are ranked up. You will need to do this methodically. I would start by getting all of the market and dojo weapons to begin with. These require little to no effort to farm for and will give you a big chunk of MR. Similarly with frames, start with the ones that can be easily farmed up from the star chart, and at this point also make sure you have access to Duviri and the circuit, as sometimes you will find a frame comes up that is a pain to farm the usual way. Anytime you need resources, take your Cora to a survival node in Steel Path of the relevant planet and farm for a couple hours to bolster your supplies. Keep working your way through until you have maxed out everything that is not prime, buying slots as and when you need them. Once done, take a look at your platinum, if you have any, and compare it to what prime parts you already have. See how much platinum you will need to fill in the gaps in your prime collection and get to work on that. Once you've collected all the prime parts, build them all at once, and then as you collect them from your foundry, sell off their corresponding non-prime variant to make space. The last things you should look to rank up are the more specialised items. For example, the Bratton and Lato Vandals, and also the Tenet and Kuva weapons, which will require a substantial former investment, as well as your Necromechs. Once all that is done, if everything has gone smoothly, you should have made it up to the legendary ranks, which concludes stage 5. So now we have access to all the items in the game, and we're a pretty high rank. There's just a few more things we need to do. Firstly, we want to make sure our arcanes are maxed out for our Warframes. This will come down to either doing a ton of Eidolon hunting or a ton of platinum farming. Secondly, we need to clear out the remaining star chart nodes on Steel Path. Thirdly, we need to start stacking up Archon shards for our builds from both the weekly Archon hunts and Sanctum Anatomica. And lastly, if you're so inclined, you might want to get some nice Riven mods to flex with. Really, at this point, you shouldn't need me to tell you what to do. You should have enough experience to know what you need, so we're going to stop here, I think. Concluding this video, I do want to say again that I will have missed things, as I didn't want this video to be too long. In fact, one of the things I probably should have mentioned earlier was the Smeeta Kavat, which at present is a great farming companion. It takes a long time to put videos like this together, so any support you can give will be much appreciated. I hope you found this video at the very least interesting. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one, guys.